Thank you, guys. Can everybody hear me okay? My name is Catherine Warner. I am been a regulatory inspector for 13 years. I started my career in USDA FSIS as a meat inspector. I then moved to the Tennessee Department of Health, and I've been with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture for the last 7 years, and it's been great. I have a lot of passion and interest in food safety. My research primarily focuses on regulatory monitoring. So that is how food safety systems, how federal agencies, state agencies, local agencies are conducting regulatory activities to increase our understanding of foodborne illnesses and to reduce the risk of foodborne illnesses in the United States. So just a little bit of an agenda today. We're going to talk about some food safety culture. We're going to talk about some added commodities to operations that you guys might be interested in, some best practices. I am a very big advocate of reducing the risk. Okay, there are things you guys can do. Eric was talking about E. coli in the 80s and salmonella and how that's been attributed to beef, and that is no longer the case. It is now attributed to produce. Okay? Produce is now the number one commodity in the United States that causes foodborne illnesses. Okay, and we're not talking about small foodborne illnesses. We are talking about multi-state, hundreds of people being involved in that. Okay, and so produce safety, and we'll talk a little bit about that. That is something. That is the new risk. You know, when I go into food safety operations, or when I go into food retailers, how they handle whole produce, how they alter that produce is a little more of a concern to me now than the meat department. Because you know what? The meat department knows what the risk is. We do not completely understand the risk dealing with produce and produce safety. We're going to talk about the Tennessee Food Freedoms Act. We're going to talk about some other exemptions that we have in the state of Tennessee. And then we'll talk about some regulatory compliance and permits. And I have tons of resources for you guys. This is just a small fraction of the resources I have. I could do 30, 40 slides on resources, okay? Tennessee is great that we have an amazing Department of Agriculture. I've worked in other states, and by far Tennessee has all the resources for you guys to be safe, to do things correctly, okay? And not only do we have the regulatory resources, we have federal connections and federal partnerships that help get you the information you need. And then we have a good relationship with academia, so we can find somebody that has the answer, okay? So food safety culture, what is food safety culture? This is the practices that you guys emphasize while working in your operations, in talking with people. Food safety, we see a lot of food safety culture now coming up in grocery stores because they're realizing that they can train people to do the right thing, but if management is not emphasizing food safety practices, that employee doesn't care, okay? So we have really kind of shifted to this food safety culture and talking about this. Employee training, okay? You guys cannot run, unless it is a small operation, an entire operation by yourself. Okay, you need help, you need workers, having some sort of employee training. You would think some of this stuff is common sense. It is not. not in this generation, okay? I'm going to share this experience. I recently got to go with my daughter and her 8th grade science class to the UT Dairy. Okay, I had 13-year-olds asking me, why does the cow look pregnant in reference to their udder? Because they did not understand that is where the milk is produced. I had 13-year-olds asking me, what's the difference between grain and hay? Okay, we think some of this is common sense because you guys have been doing it for generations, you've lived it, you breathe it every day, but the majority of the population does not understand. Okay, transparency and communication, also very important. Transparency with the regulatory authority, transparency with academia on what you're doing, how you're doing it. Good communication, okay? Communicating things, okay? I cannot stress this enough. I cannot give you an answer to a regulatory question or something that is possibly a regulatory question if I do not understand what you're doing. Okay, having good communication and transparency is important. And consumer education and awareness. Okay, we have a whole generation growing up that does not understand where your food comes from. Okay, we have a whole generation. If you walked into a middle school or a high school in Knox County and asked them where does their food come from, you know what the number one answer you're going to get? Grocery store. Okay, that is not where our food comes from, people. I explain that all the time to kids, like, your food comes from a farm, from a farmer, okay? So we'll kind of move into some extra added commodities you can add. Jams and jellies have become a big thing. In smaller operations, baked goods are always a very good thing. Generally, baked goods are low risk, non-potentially hazardous. Wellness products, soaps, lotions, balms. We recently had a huge recall with USDA FSIS because there was a facility that was providing a soap company tallow, and they had to recall it. They had to recall the tallow, and they had to recall all the soaps. Okay, so, you know, those things are great, but adhering to food safety practices is extremely important. Other educational programs that have worked out really well for smaller operations are workshops, classes, farm tours, and field trips. Okay, again, there is not a elementary, middle, or high school that could not benefit from a farmer, from a small operation, going into the classroom, participating in farm days, participating in some sort of agriculture day to get those kids to understand the importance, not only of what a farm is, but also in the preservation of farmland. Okay, everything's all and great until the family moves in next to the 200-year-old farm and is complaining about the cows. Okay, no joke. During COVID, I had a manufacturer that was starting to operate, and the conversation at the end of the inspection was, who do I need to call because the cows are loud? Okay, it was weaning time, mom's bellowing, babies are bellowing, and I was like, buddy, those cows have been there for a very long time. You're just going to have to deal with it. Okay, having conversations with people. We've seen a lot of people move into Tennessee coming from different parts of the country. They're less familiar with agriculture. They're less familiar with farming operations. Okay, going over and talking to them about your farm, the history of your farm, what you do is all very important because they probably do not understand. Okay, I am super glad that we have seen a lot of people starting homesteads and wanting to learn more about these types of operations, but you also need to explain to them, have those conversations, because it is important. Hosting events, farm tours. Airbnb has a thing now that you can go stay on the farm and participate in a day, what it's like operating on a farm. Working on a farm. All great things. So food, best practices for food safety, good animal husbandry practices, making sure your animals are healthy and happy, appearing, if you do have to treat an animal with antibiotics, appearing to withdrawal times. We see that a lot. When I was a USDA inspector, we saw animals come in being presented for inspection, and we'd have to pull the animal because there was a concern about antibiotic use. Okay, so appearing to withdrawal times, segregating those animals so it's not affecting the herd. Those are all very important things that add to best practices. Harvesting techniques. I am not a produce safety. That is not my area of expertise. However, I will tell you, with the Food Safety Modernization Act that has now come into play, okay, this is a big concern. Pre-harvest, harvest, and post-harvest. How things are being conducted, what techniques are being used, water sources are being used, water quality. This is all something that is going to continue to impact you guys as we move forward. Food safety regulations are not going away. Okay, it's just not. In fact, they are getting, as the science grows and as we understand more about what affects health and foodborne illness, they are going to continue to grow. And let me tell you, and this is a conversation I have with some of my producers and my operators, those big farming operations, they have got a whole team that just deals with this. Okay, they've got PhDs, they've got scientists, they have got the best of the best. Okay, so as we move forward in produce safety and in these harvesting techniques, reach out. We have resources that can help and that you guys can utilize, okay, that are of minimal cost or free, okay? I will do anything to get you to the right person, okay, and make sure you have the information you can have to make informed decisions. Storage and transportation. From farm to table, this is something that we are concerned about. When I go into a food manufacturer and they are utilizing local sources for some of their ingredients, for their raw commodities, this is something that I have a long conversation about. Okay, keeping things stored correctly, keeping, away from pests, away from water, up off the ground is all extremely important. How that food is transported, how those raw commodities are transported is also very important. We do not want produce in the back of a transport vehicle that's had pesticides. Okay, the risk of contamination is high. Okay, so thinking about those sort of things. Traceability. This is on the produce side, on the animal side. Traceability is becoming a new hot topic. Okay, on the animal side, they're starting to implement, and Tennessee has started to implement some traceability of animals. 2 years ago, we had a case of mad cow disease, BSE, in the state of Tennessee. Okay, that animal was taken across state lines into South Carolina. Okay, and that impacts. We were able to isolate that incident very fast because that animal was tracked. okay, because we knew where it was and we could go directly, not me personally, but APHIS could go directly there and do the investigation that they needed to do, okay? Traceability is important because in the 13 years that I've been doing this, I have seen 2 incidents where traceability has hurt that producer more than it's helped, okay? And the only reason it hurt them is because they flat out ignored a test result and was like, I don't know, I don't care, whatever the reason was, and sent the product out. And it shouldn't have been sent out, okay? What does traceability look like? There is no defining feature of what traceability looks like, okay? Keeping records, harvest dates, when you take something to a producer, a manufacturer, a grocery store, keeping records of what you took, how you took it, if there was a temperature, if you kept it in temperature, what that temperature was. I have seen some of the best farm records kept in a notebook, okay? You don't have to get all fancy. Some of these companies are moving to digital tracing, lot numbers, all that kind of stuff. We're not there yet, okay? Just keeping some good dates, some harvest records. If you are taking 2 bushels to a store, when you took it, how much it weighed, okay, when it was harvested, those are all good traceabilities. And it helps a lot, okay? When we have the FDA has what's called a regulatory traceback, okay? Regulatory tracebacks are how we find out the source of a foodborne illness. We can regulatory trace back a head of lettuce on a plot of land in another country, okay? We are getting good at this, okay? So keep some records, keep something to show what you did, how you did it, that sort of thing. Okay, and then just working with regulatory compliance to make sure that you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. Okay, I will say, having 13 years in regulatory, we do not do a very good job of talking to each other, different departments. And that is something that I hope in the future we will continue to work on and collaborate more. So when you call me and say, I have this question, I can say, you need to talk to this person in this department. I can only take you so far. This person can take you the rest of the way. So, risk mitigation. I always prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Okay, anytime I walk into a food manufacturer, anytime I walk into a dairy, anytime I walk into a retailer, I am prepared for the worst and hope for the best. Okay, there are things that you guys can do. It doesn't matter the size of the operation that can help reduce the risk of foodborne illness, increase your food safety culture. Some of those things are regular training and education. Okay, if you have people that come in and help harvest or help with animals, just talking to them about health, sanitation. If they're sick, okay, they can get that animal sick. We live in a world of zoonotic diseases, okay? You don't want them around your cows. If they have pneumonia, your cows can get pneumonia, okay? TB, foodborne illnesses, animals tend to be a little more hardy with some of that, but we have diseases that transfer all the time, from animals to humans and humans to animals. Sanitation and hygiene protocols, this is talking about having regularly washing your hands, having, if you have a barn or some area where you can set up a hand sink, so as you change task, as you go from handling produce or handling animals, having ability to wash your hands, having restroom facilities, that sort of thing. It's all very important. Pest control and management. We could talk a whole day about pest control and management. I am not a pest control management professional. However, I will say that even in manufacturing, food manufacturing operations and retail operations, people think that they can provide pest control when they're making foods. Okay, you are not trained to do that. You should not be doing that. Okay, talk to your inspector about, there are several ways that you can do it without the harsh use of chemicals. Glue traps is what we often recommend. It's not the most humane thing, but a zoonotic disease and your produce getting eaten by rodents isn't great either. So, insecticides and pesticides, using around that, make sure you're adhering to manufacturer's instructions. Make sure you're regularly checking those manufacturing instructions. You would be amazed how often people change formulas, people change recommendations for what it can be used for. During COVID, we saw a huge shift in how things were done. Things that had never been required to have refrigeration for years now required refrigeration. Okay, and that has to do with availability and product formulation, water quality. If you have a farm, water quality is going to be a hot topic. They are working right now on water requirements for farming operations, for produce operations. They are still kind of in the public comment of that, so we will see how that pans out. But, having good water quality source for what you are doing, not dumping into streams. No joke, I was involved with a USDA compliance case that we had to get the EPA involved in because the processor did not want to pay the extra money to have the wastewater dumped in a approved facility. So he went out and cut the pipe and diverted it into a stream. Okay, so now we have wastewater from a slaughter facility going into a stream. So that's not good with USDA, and they don't allow that. So then we had to call in the EPA. Okay, let me tell you, if you've ever dealt with the EPA, I've worked with those guys several times. They do not come out without a fine. Okay, they do not. Okay, if they're going to come out to a place, you're going to get a fine. This particular guy got a $144,000 fine for what he did. And USDA took away his processing license. He was no longer, they pulled his inspector. No inspector, no processing. Okay? He's very lucky that he didn't get prosecuted for that because he caused a lot of environmental wastewater issues. Food contact services. We have this nice produce crate there. Keeping those clean. Okay, there is no required frequency, but can periodically sanitizing those in an approved sanitizer, making sure they're clean, reduces risk. We kind of talked about traceability. Just keep some type of good record. What you did, how you did it. Health management for livestock and poultry. I don't think that, I know the general public does, but the health of livestock has huge effects for you, has huge effects for your neighbors, and has huge effects on the economy. Okay, when we get a case of mad cow disease in the United States, everybody puts restrictions on us until we've completed our investigation. Okay, I know several veterinarians that had the opportunity and volunteered to go over and deploy with the UK during their foot and mouth disease outbreak. And that outbreak started 3 weeks before the inspector found it and alerted who he needed to alert to do their restrictions, okay? It was going on 3 weeks, and by the time 3 weeks was over, it was in 3/4 of the country, okay? I think the total for that FMD outbreak in the UK was $3.4 billion. 71 people lost their life, okay? 71 deaths were attributed to that. Some of those farmers had to put down century-old stock, okay, breed lines that will never get back. So the health and management of your livestock has an effect on your neighbor, okay? Emergency preparedness and response plans. This is one area that I think we do not do a very good job. Regulatory, academically, do you have a response plan for your animals if there's a fire, if there's flood? Okay, what are you going to do with those animals? Are you able to move them to high ground? Are you able to get them out? Okay, I had the opportunity to work with a response group that went into western Nebraska, looking at the health effects, actually, of the flooding that happened there. And 2 people that, out of that had lost their life, refused to evacuate because they weren't going to leave their herd. Okay? They stayed with their herd. They tried to intervene to save some of their stock, and it ended up costing them their lives. A lot of the emergency preparedness on farming operations, there's very little to non-existent. This is one area of research that I hope to expand on in my future career, to have plans in place to help livestock operations, to help people understand, one, what can they do for their stock during an emergency, and also to prepare first responders and recovery teams on that. Okay? We can put up a house back pretty fast after a disaster, right? After a fire, if a house burns down, moves away, we can put it back. Cattle operation's not easy to get back, to get that breed stock back. And so I hope, but it's something to think about. Obviously, our first concern and emergency response's first concern is getting you out, okay? But some people don't want to leave because of their animals. We have done better with this on the domestic pet side of it. A lot of the emergency shelters now, in the case of a disaster, now have accommodations for pets, which is great, but what about livestock? I worked for a veterinarian during Hurricane Katrina. Okay, I was in Central Texas at the time. When Katrina hit and when the flooding started, we had a lot of horses. I worked for an equine vet. We had a lot of horses in the Houston area, Corpus Christi area, that we needed to get out. I swam 2.5 miles in flood water to bring out 4 very high dollar horses. Okay? And we should have gotten those horses out earlier, but we did not. The state veterinarian wouldn't allow movement restrictions. There were a lot of requirements up front, and we're starting to see that we need to open this up during emergency to allow these animals to get out as well. Audits and certifications. So there are different audits on the produce side that you can now get. Audits are great over the long term because these GAP audits and GIS audits allow for you to expand into different markets, expand into grocery stores. I can tell you that if you want to get into a grocery store, it's not as simple as going up and saying, hey, I got a really good product, I want to put it in there. That grocery store wants to see these food safety plans. They want to see these traceability systems because that's what's required by their liability insurance to take on. Organic certification is a question I often get. We have funding at the state level if that is something that you're interested in getting those certifications. And again, educating consumers, always super important. When you guys go to farmers markets, when you sell from your farm stands or have people on your property, educating them about what you do, how you're doing it, what steps you are taking to, on some of these areas to keep them safe. Okay, TN Food Freedoms Act. This is a relatively new piece of legislation that has come through. This replaced the cottage food laws that many of you probably previously have heard of. The Food Freedoms Act allows in-home processing at a private residence. So you do not have to be in a permitted commercial space. The food must meet pH and water activity requirements. And the guidance document that I have in the resources provides guidance on pH and water activity. It cannot be a temperature controlled for safety food, meaning if you make a cheesecake at home, okay, that a cheesecake is temperature controlled for safety, okay? Cream cheese icing, I just had a meeting. I was just in a discussion about, whether cream cheese icing for cinnamon rolls is a temperature controlled for safety food, and the answer is it could be. Okay, there are factors, the pH and the water activity, specifically the water activity of that cream cheese icing is going to be the determining factor there. So if you are producing any foods under the Freedoms Food Act, there are labeling requirements. Okay, we must have the producer's name, we must have the home address and phone number, full street address, the food by common name, ingredients in descending order of predominance, and sub-ingredients. So can anybody tell me what the allergen is in butter? Milk. What about chocolate? Let's say a dark chocolate. Soy. Okay. You cannot put butter on that label. Okay. You can put butter and then in parentheses, milk, salt, whatever the ingredients are. Okay. Chocolate is often one I see in food manufacturers. I'll review their label during the inspection, and they'll say chocolate chips. And then I'm like, show me a package of the chocolate chips, and it's got a whole bunch of sub-ingredients. Okay? Anything under the Freedoms Food Act has to have is required to have a disclaimer that this product was produced at a private residence that is exempt from state licensing and inspection. This product may contain allergens. Two things about this. One, you should always identify the allergens, okay? And that should be done through the ingredients list. Excuse me. The second question I always get is, how big does this statement have to be on the package? It has to be legible, okay? I have seen some of these that were so small that I needed a microscope, okay? That's not a disclaimer if you can't read it, okay? And it needs to be clear. I've seen other ones that have, whether it was by mistake, by design, I can't speak to that, but it was so blurry, I couldn't read the words, okay? But that is required. So some other food, other exemptions. So we have cow and animal shares. This has become a very big thing since COVID. Animal shares, cow shares, these are being processed under custom exempt. So USDA FSIS has a custom exempt guidance document, which any custom processor has to adhere to. Okay, and we'll talk a little more about cow shares and what that really means on the next slide. Another one is unclassified, ungraded eggs. Okay, you have to have less than 3,000 laying hens. Okay, you are required to have a safe handling label. The eggs must be cleaned in a clean carton and have the required information, farm name, address, phone number, and a classification, ungraded or unclassified. I will never forget the day my mom, I did not come from a farming background, okay? My mom could not tell you the difference between a beef cow and a dairy cow, okay? I will never forget the day my mom calls me, she's at the farmer's market, and she goes, "What does unclassified mean?" And I was like, "Mom, that means it wasn't USDA graded." Okay. Oh, okay. People do not understand some of these terms. Okay, so explaining to people what unclassified means, okay, is important because they only know grade A, grade B, grade AA. Why? Because that's what they see in the store. Okay. So indicating that they are ungraded or unclassified is important. We have a honey exemption in the state of Tennessee. You are required to have a TDA permit if you package or sell more than 150 gallons per year. Okay? Okay. So that is important. We'll move on to farm-based meats. This is probably one of the more important slides. If you are going to sell meat on your farm, you need a farm-based meat retail permit. Those are being provided by our food and dairy section. The cost is $15. You get an inspection frequency of every 18 months. Okay, we are not going to show up at your farm on that 18-month mark. Okay, our inspectors do not do that. We call, make sure you're there, work with you on your schedule. Okay, one farm-based meat permit does cover all species. So you can do cows, pigs, goats, lambs. It does not cover deer, elk, wild boar. Okay, those are non-amenable species. Okay, in very few situations in USDA FSIS will they go under voluntary inspection. Okay, wild game is a non-amenable species. We do not do inspection. We permit facilities that process that, but we do not do an inspection on that meat. This permit does not cover cow share or animal shares. So if you're running a cow share or animal share, you need to have this meat separated from the USDA inspected meat. And this does not cover on the farm pasture-raised chickens. Okay? So that is where you have a cow and you'll have 3 individuals buy the cow. Sometimes they'll buy the whole cow. Sometimes they'll buy half the cow. Those are commonly referred to as animal shares. So we'll talk a little more about regulatory permits. You can always get a TDA retail permit. If you want to build a little farm stand, a little, weekend farm stand. You can get a TDA retail permit. We have permits that range from high risk to low risk. Fees on those vary by risk. Our retail permits cover the Retail Sanitation Code, the FDA Food Code. Okay. Let's say you are going to do some little farm stand on your property. You are allowed to have commercially prepared, temperature controlled for safety foods. You are allowed to have whole produce. You're allowed to have packaged foods. You are allowed to have foods that are processed under the Food Freedoms Act, okay, but they must meet the labeling requirements. There can be no TCS foods under Freedom's Food Act and no meats. Like you can't make beef jerky and sell it in your farm stand, okay? Beef jerky is ready to eat and requires USDA permitting and inspection. We also have TDA manufacturing permits. If you are ever interested in getting a TDA manufacturing permit, please reach out and talk to me. Let's have a conversation, okay? Much like the produce safety rule that is moving forward, okay, manufacturing is a whole nother beast. You are dealing with the federal regulations. Okay, these are not state regulations, these are federal regulations. And much like USDA FSIS regulations, this regulation is covering the biggest and the baddest of them down to the smallest, okay? So here's some resources, lots of guidance documents. Some of these are older, okay? We are in a shift right now of food safety, not only because of FSMA, but because of we are going to see how changes at the federal level will trickle down to the states at this point. A lot of these programs, specifically with the produce, animal health, and food safety, we get a lot of federal funding for those. Some of those inspectors are paid through federal grants and federal funds, so we will see how this will move in the coming months and years. So, any questions? Or we're going to have a panel discussion, so... Yeah, does anybody?
I think you mentioned all the safety regulations for produce, and you mentioned some exemptions for animals, for cashier.
Yes.
And whatnot. Are there any exemptions for like you picket operations, like you pick your own blackberries or blueberries?
So,
Can you repeat the question, Ben?
yes. So the question was, we have exemptions for processing in animals such as cow shares. What about if you have an operation where you go pick your own, like pick your own blueberries, strawberries, those sort of things? That is considered a harvest, okay? There's less on that than we have currently for processors. I would recommend, following the good hygienic practices, having hand washing stations, having access, if possible, to restrooms, having notices about, look, you guys are going out and picking things that have been in the dirt, wash your hands. Okay, especially for the younger generation, you'd be surprised how much kids put in their mouth. Yes?
On the animal share, I thought as a producer, when you took the cow and had it slaughtered, you could not go pick that meat up.
That is correct. Okay, so the question was, if you are on a cow share, you take the animal to the processor, you're not supposed to pick that meat up and bring it back to their house or whatever. So I'm going to tell you there's a little gray area right now with this. The state is looking and putting in a meat inspection program, so hopefully the guidelines on this are going to become very clear. USDA FSIS custom exempt says that one, that animal should be transferred. The ownership of that animal should be transferred on foot. Okay? You need to sell that animal live. Okay? When you take it to the processor, okay, you can tell the processor, hey, I'm dropping this off. Here are the 2 owners of this cow, or 4 owners, or whatever it be. Okay? They got to come pick it up. I know there are other things happening out there that are not following those guidelines. I encourage anybody that I have this discussion with to follow the federal guidelines. When the state puts in the meat inspection program, that program and the requirement of USDA and that cooperative agreement to have that inspection program says that it has to be equal to or better than the federal program. Okay? There are going to some people that the dynamics of their business on how they're operating now is going to change. Yes. Okay. Because people do not understand what custom exempt means. Okay. I encourage producers to explain that. Okay. As a USDA inspector, I got that question all the time. I'd have people bring in cows. The plant manager's running me down to say, hey, look, I need you to come look at this cow because it doesn't look good. Okay? And then not my jurisdiction, it's custom. I would tell him what I thought. He'd call the owner and he said, I don't care. I'm going to eat it anyway. Okay? So people do not understand that. So explaining that, I have a lot of cow share operators that it doesn't matter if they take it to USDA inspection because they don't want to deal with something getting by and causing illness or causing that. So any other questions? Yes?
What about on-farm events like a farm-to-table dinner and meals that are served there? Either as part of like a membership or ticketed?
So I will tell you that we do not regulate that. Okay, the Tennessee Department of Health, it's always good to run that by them. The question was, if you do a farm meal, farm-to-table meal at your facility, what that looks like and what's required of that. Okay, TDA is not going to regulate that. I would encourage you to contact the Department of Health and run it by them. Say, hey, I'm having an event. It's a one-day event. Is there anything I need to be aware of? Okay. Again, that's going to come down to you informing that person, hey, look, we are having a farm-to-table event. This meal is going to be catered. This meal is going to be cooked on site, whatever that is. Okay. If you inform the consumer has been informed, that's their decision to participate or not. Okay? Adhering to good food safety practices during the whole thing is also very important. Any other questions? Right.
If you are interested in obtaining a retail food or you've got a permit, I would encourage you to reach out to Ms. Warner and her colleagues with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. They will talk you through that process.
Yeah.
The only other thing I will add, now is not a good time to be looking for federal employment.
Yes.
However,
Yes.
the soon-to-be Dr. Warner, if you have any connections with United Nations, Food and Ag Organization, maybe even Department of Defense, let Catherine know.
Yes. I have submitted several grants to CDC. They have not been pulled, so they are currently in review. But I appreciate you guys coming to let me talk, and please reach out. Several people that I've interacted in this room can tell you there's no dumb question, and I will talk to you until I'm blue in the face and answer all your questions so you have a very formed understanding of what you're getting into. okay, and what the risks are, okay? We want you guys to be out there. I am not a big, I don't have any problem admitting this, I'm not a big supporter of corporate ag, okay? I think our food system, I think our food safety would be a lot better off if we had more regional, local farmers, okay? And I'm a huge advocate for you guys. I will remain, regardless of where I am in the government, in my position, I am an advocate for you guys. So please reach out, okay? We want to keep you guys here, and we want to see the next generation of farmers come up, okay? Because that's how that is what we need, okay? Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.